Today, guys, we are going to be jumping off of
Yes. Welcome to another episode of Jumping Off Points, the podcast where we use current events to discuss politics and culture. I'm here with Tim. How are you doing, Timber?
Yes, very good, man. What you said?
I'm feeling very, very pleased to see £5 rolling into my bank account today.
I'm quite sad about that. I actually held up for the longest amount of time not paying it to you. And then the night before the show, I was like, if I don't transfer him the £5 now, he'll use it as leverage to besmirch my character on stream.
Yeah, you're so right. And to be honest, I'm still going to try and do that now, even though you have paid me.
Yeah, well done, mate. You're a little fascist politician. Got a lot of votes. I bet you're pleased.
Yeah, so for listeners who did not listen to the end of our last podcast, firstly, shame on you. Secondly, you missed us making a bet about how many votes Lawrence Fox would get in the recent Uxbridge by-election. And I won, basically. I think, what did I say? 700, and how many?
Aidan said he would get 700, and I think he actually didn't he get like pretty much bang on 700? It was like 711 or something.
Yeah, he got 714. Pretty terrible.
700 points, yeah, so still bad. But yeah, I predicted 300. So yeah, Aidan was way closer. But I'm going to use this show to not let it go to his head. Maybe we'll make another little bet and we'll see who's crying next week, huh?
Yeah, it's going to be you, mate. It's going to be you. Maybe we should touch on what happened in the by-election.
Go on then. So the whole of our last podcast episode revolved around the Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election, which is, of course, the seat that used to be held by Boris Johnson, who would have had to fight for his seat in an election and ducked out. Polls ahead of this election were saying that Labour was very strongly in the lead. I think it was a 13-point lead. However, in the background, we had this big issue of the ULEZ tax, which seemed to be a really, really strong incentive to get independents and Conservatives out to vote for Conservatives. We got Conservatives finishing up in the lead with a very, very narrow margin of victory over Labour. And then everyone else was just way low down, right? Like Lib Dems, Greens, Lawrence Fox, everyone was sort of in the dregs at the bottom of the vote tallies after that.
Yeah. And in the dregs, possibly at the very heart of the dregs, was today's topic of the podcast, Piers Corbyn. Lawrence Fox got 714 votes. Pathetic. Piers Corbyn got 101 votes.
As we said in the last podcast, this is the sort of amount of votes you get when you just tell your family and friends on Facebook to turn up and vote for you. So, Piers Corbyn, how did he first appear on your radar, Aidan? How did you first hear of him?
The first times I would have ever even knew that he existed was during the coughing illness. He was in the news quite a lot for various things that he disagreed with the kind of mainstream narrative on the coughing illness.
The Prime Minister himself was hospitalised with the virus. How much more evidence do you need?
Well, was he hospitalised with the virus or was he ill from something else?
As we're going to say a lot in this podcast, we've made up little code words to avoid algorithm smushing us. So I'm going to say that he protested the pokey a lot.
The pokey, yeah. The medicine pokey.
The statistics show that more people get lower immune systems when they've had vaccines.
Let's bring in Dr. Hillary. Someone who is an expert.
Sadly, episode 6, I think it was episode 6 of our podcast, was removed from YouTube. In my view, completely wrongly, because YouTube's algorithm thought that we were spreading misinformation. Oh my God. Thought we were spreading
coughing illness misinformation. Yeah. So for me, a little bit different. I actually first heard of Piers Corbyn when he appeared on a YouTube channel run by Sargon of Akkad.
Hi folks, I'm interviewing an ex-Labour councillor and activist. And
two things were evident to me at that point. One, if Sargon of Akkad wants to talk to this guy, and Sargon of Akkad is a classical liberal, which functionally means you're a liberal as they existed some 1,000 years ago, and he supports every far-right leader that ever runs for election, Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, Donald Trump.
So I think Le Pen is going to win the French elections, and I will tell you exactly why. They will pay to get rid of the bloody immigrants who are trying to kill them.
If he's interested in interviewing Jeremy Corbyn's brother, and it wasn't a aggressive interview, then clearly there's something about these two that aligns. And secondly, if Piers Corbyn, who is, again, the brother of who was at that point the Labour leader, a left-wing, most prominent left-wing politician in the UK, is happy to go on Sargon of Akkad's YouTube channel, Piers Corbyn, in the same light, is obviously not fazed by any of this sort of support of far-right populists or any of those political viewpoints that Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, espouses. So instantly I was like, what's going on? There's something to be needled into here. There's something for me to penetrate in terms of the political alignment going on between these two.
Yeah, and I mean, he is satisfyingly odd.
Yes.
There's nothing about Piers Corbyn that is at all conventional. Like, he is very odd.
You are selling lies. Man-made climate change does not exist. You are working for the devil.
There's the word that exists, crank, which is a person who's touting bullshit medicine and they're touting bullshit theories. And I've always thought the onomatopoeic quality of that word, crank, it conjures the image of an old man shaking a stick at the kind of civilized world, going rah 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 rah,
with hair that looks like Piers Corbyn's hair,
with hair bulging like out of his head, like grey and wispy. And it's actually very rare that anyone who is touting crank theories actually looks like that. They're often quite slick in the modern world. They're quite charismatic.
Yeah.
They're quite smooth and quite relatable, and they have a really good way of selling you on those crank theories. Piers Corbyn is the exact image of what you would think a crank would look like and how a crank would talk.
And when they say comply again, I say ping off.
Also, I think we can come on to this more later in the discussion, but it is really striking how untalented Piers Corbyn is as a spokesperson or as a politician.
This we'll definitely see in the later parts of the podcast, so I don't want to jump ahead of ourselves, because we will get there, believe me.
Much like his brother, Piers Corbyn has had quite a long career in leftist politics. So he got his first start as the first directly elected union president for the Imperial College Students' Union, where he went to uni.
I've actually got here, Aidan, a news clip, or not a news clip, but an archival video clip that I found on YouTube of Piers Corbyn as a young guy at his student faculty meeting. And I'd like just to watch it with you and to get your first response to seeing him at this age.
Here with us this afternoon, we have Piers Corbyn, the IC Union President.
We're going to assess some of the successes or not of certain union policies.
Have you seen him? He looks very like Woodstock, the kind of hippie sort of student look. It's so weird seeing him like that, because I've only ever known him as this like kind of skeleton like old man figure. And I don't know, he looks quite cool, I would say. He's the kind of guy that if I was at uni at that time, I probably would have hung out with. If I met him at a party, I'd feel like I could probably drag him into some weird esoteric conversation.
Yes, he looks like a massive nerd, and that's probably why you think that you would have been friends with.
It's true, I do. At house parties, I always like suss out who the other nerd in the room is, and I drag them into some weird conversation about Magic the Gathering or something. And he's the exact type of guy I could do that with. What I'd say about his younger self, I can hear from the way he talks, he's got that bureaucratic delivery of a young student who's passionate about a cause. You can see that he's really, really intent on coming across as formal and being taken seriously as this union head.
Yeah. And from what I've read, I think he did actually like do quite a good job of being the student union president. So he brought in better representation of students on uni committees. There seemed to be a good legacy that he'd had there.
And in a similar way to a lot of young people, that was probably where he found his sense of self.
Yeah.
Whatever we're most passionate about, whether it's music, gaming, politics, that's where we derive our whole value. And if you're getting praised by people as well, it intensifies that feeling of this is my calling, this is what I was built to do.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, so he went to uni to study science. I can't exactly remember which. But obviously, you're right that he kind of developed this love of politics while he was at uni. And that's what he ended up doing afterwards as well. So then he ended up standing to be an independent candidate for Westminster Council a couple of times. And then he went on to stand in the Greater London Council election as an international Marxist group candidate. So he really goes into what I would call proper far left politics after uni. And then he ends up at Labour in 1986, and he is temporarily a Labour councillor for about 4 years, and then he loses his seat. And he's in the Labour Party until 2002, when he leaves over the Iraq War.
So this is interesting because he actually has a pedigree in not only politics, but establishment politics. He was in the fray.
Yeah, for
which
sure.
I wouldn't have expected from recent shenanigans.
But I mean, I suppose it kind of shows that he never really made it on a high level in politics. Like he was kind of at the lower end of success in politics, I would say.
Being a councillor, though, you talk to your local people.
Sure. It's an important job, and it is not something that everyone can do to get elected to be a Labour councillor. So between 2002 and 2017, he really goes off the rails in terms of what he's doing outside of running for elections. And he's blocked from rejoining the Labour Party in 2017. So outside of politics, Piers Corbyn's career has been based around meteorology. So he is someone that he built a company that predicted weather forecasts, basically. There's one particular topic that he becomes fascinated by, which is the potential link between solar activity and the weather on Earth. He essentially now rejects the mainstream narrative about climate change. And where that comes from, in my opinion, is his interest in this potential link between solar activity and the weather on Earth. He made probably quite a lot of money predicting the weather based on a calculation or a formula that he kept secret and didn't tell anyone, using observations about the sun to predict what the weather was going to be in like a long-term way. So like in 6 months' time, what will happen. And from there, he then doesn't think that anything else can possibly affect the weather or the climate. He's fixated on this one particular issue. So whenever the evidence is put to him about, for example, CO2 being released and how that affects the climate, he rejects it on the basis that he's just much more interested in this thing about the sun. He is intelligent, and he does have a scientific basis for some of the things that he says, although most meteorologists reject Corbyn's approach to predicting the weather.
This is the main thing I found. People did like a review of Piers Corbyn's meteorological system. And what they found was they compared the readings and predictions they got back from Piers Corbyn's system to the meteorology that you could find on BBC Weather or whatever your local news station is that gives you weather updates. And they found that fundamentally there was no difference between what Piers Corbyn was predicting and the weather system that's available to everyone for free. So whilst Piers Corbyn is charging people for this model system he's got, neither system predicts the weather with 100% accuracy. They get it somewhat close. So whatever he's got, the secrecy behind it, it's sort of like, well, why do you need to come up with this model and system if you're getting similar results to the ones that exist for everyone that everyone can access for free?
Yeah, and it's because of narcissism, basically.
Yeah.
He basically wants to be seen as someone who revolutionized the field, but most other people don't seem to think that he has done that. Also, interestingly, his company that he set up based on these predictions was called Weather Action. And some of his clients for this company included big corporations who he wouldn't necessarily predict that a massive leftist would get into business with, like Monsanto, British Gas, and a number of petrochemical service companies.
No way. I didn't know this.
So, yeah, I just think that's interesting. I have nothing more to say about that.
That's what we do here.
Yeah.
Jacking off. Have you heard that phrase before? Jacking off.
No, I kind of just laughed, but I didn't.
So a lot of like conspiracy theorists do like just asking questions. So JAQ. And so if you're jacking off, you're just asking questions-ing.
Oh, I like it. I like
that you laughed to be polite to me.
In my head, I was like, this is a wanking joke that's going to get cut out.
I just thought that you valued my like me not feeling ashamed about a bad joke so much that you gave me a little laugh, even though you didn't know what it meant. And I thought that was quite sweet.
I always will, mate. That's Piers Corbyn outside of politics. But don't worry, he doesn't stay outside of politics for too long. We get him back. So in 2021, he sets up his party, Let London Live, which is essentially a single issue party. And that single issue is the coughing illness and not being allowed to go to the shops rule that comes in when you have the coughing illness.
And the obligatory pokey in the arm.
Yes, they really don't like that. He sets up this party in 2021, and he runs to be London mayor in 2021. And when they have the London mayoral election, they also have, at the same time, an election for the Greater London Assembly, which is kind of like Parliament, I guess, but just for London. It's like the big all across London council sort of thing. And the other people who are representing Let London Live with him are absolutely nuts. Like, as a group of people, you would just never put them together. I'm going to give you some highlights. So you've got this guy, Heiko Bernard Koo, is someone that has studied Marxist ideas for 33 years and now runs a company that delivers Karl Marx walking tours in London.
So I actually have an audio clip of someone who I believe to be Heiko Koo disrupting an event. It was like a Labour event where they have climate change as one of the issues they're discussing. And he bursts in with this loud interruption.
Mate, you need to read the room and now leave.
Piers Corbyn is talking about it in like a video live stream that he does with someone afterwards.
Right.
And Piers Corbyn, with a very, very sincere tone, says, "We simply wanted to go and discuss the scientific facts."
We went there to ask questions and have debate. Heiko and I wish to ask questions.
Yeah, the excuse they made in the newspapers seem to all adopt the same narrative that we were disruptive and destroying the meeting and all the rest of it.
The narrative that we were being disruptive has been manufactured by the media. And you go back and you look at the clip and you're like, you're shouting at them. The contrast between the way he thinks about his work, his activist work, and the way it actually then spills out as when you look at the videos of him doing the activism.
Yeah, for sure. So someone else who ran in the same election with Heiko Koo is Sylvia de Barsa, who there is a video clip of her as part of her campaign to be elected in London, criticising Bill Gates for buying up land and Monsanto for patenting seeds and how that affects Punjabi farmers in India.
As you may be aware, Bill Gates is buying land, but coincidentally, the government in India is taking out the land from the farmers.
Making no mention of local issues to London at all. Then Julia Stevenson, who is an animal rights activist and someone who has stood as a candidate for both the Green Party and the Brexit Party. She wrote a memoir about trying to live sustainably in Chelsea and rescuing battery hens.
Oh, really? Reaching across the aisle here.
Really? So this is what I mean. And then there's someone else called Renos Sampson, and I cannot find anything about them on the internet, but there is a Twitter account of the name Renos Sampson. I have been unable to verify if it's the same person, but this Twitter account is absolutely full of the most hateful content you've ever seen, like proper far right stuff, like Islamophobia, saying that Derek Chauvin was innocent of killing George Floyd, supporting Lawrence Fox, quite nutty stuff. So this group of people together is something I find it very hard to know what the demographic is who would agree with all of these people. And basically the conclusion I've come to is that you are mentally ill. There's no other factor that would see you agree with all of these people at once.
So, two things at once. There's an issue where people are so uniparty in their politics and don't analyze things with an analytical brain. They just support every issue that the political party they vote for espouses. I think that's a problem. But then there's a second problem, which is people picking one issue to rally around and not thinking about how this is going to work out if they get into power.
100%, yeah. This group of people coming together under his umbrella party is quite typical of how Piers Corbyn operates. Like you said, he's very, very willing to go and talk to very right-wing people on YouTube because of his subversive views on certain topics. He ends up rubbing shoulders with people from all across the political spectrum who all join together on those issues. So it means that even though he, on economic stuff, is very left-wing and, he's very like a socialist, he'll also have a lovely chat on YouTube with someone who's the most far-right person you've ever seen. It's bizarre.
There was this conversation that Piers Corbyn had with Mike Graham.
Talk TV presenter, yeah.
He says he's not a conservative, but I think that's only because the Conservatives are not far right enough for him.
He's not necessarily a Conservative Party member, but only because he might vote for the Brexit Party rather than Conservative Party.
Yeah.
He's never going to vote Labour, basically.
He's very in line with the IEA, I think, the Institute of Economic Affairs. He wants a very, very right-wing fiscal policy that the Conservatives, because they still do handouts and stuff, don't satisfy for him.
He said that George Osborne was someone who really should have been a Labour politician. So,
yeah. This is who we're talking about. So he brings Piers Corbyn on, obviously expecting a conversation about Extinction Rebellion, and also wants to trash Piers Corbyn's brother a lot, which is a very underhanded move. So Piers Corbyn comes on the show. They spend a little bit of time trashing climate activists, which is what Mike Graham wants.
Well, they're forcing through the climate change agenda. Climate change policy doesn't control climate, it's to control you.
And then Mike Graham himself brings the conversation onto Piers Corbyn's brother, Jeremy.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your brother, Jeremy Corbyn, of course. I mean, I can't imagine what sort of conversations you have with him about this, but he's obviously fallen for the green agenda, isn't he?
Yeah, I think it is a common thread across almost every interview that happens with Piers Corbyn since, 2015, is that they always try and have a gotcha moment about what Jeremy Corbyn believes. They always say, oh, so does your brother agree with you about this? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, he's not here. Let him speak for himself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is the piece of shit that Mike Graham is. The chain of events is he asks him about his brother Jeremy Corbyn. Piers Corbyn then defends all Jeremy Corbyn's policies.
Well, we'll just list through some of the things in the Labour manifesto.
Go on then.
Saving the NHS.
And then Mike Graham then asks him to defend the policies that he's talked positively about.
Well, the NHS isn't going anywhere.
Well, yeah. But I mean, there is not enough investment in it.
150 billion a year.
Yeah, I know, but
how much do you want?
And then after 20 minutes of Mike Graham challenging him on every single Labour policy.
So try and convince me.
Says,
I didn't expect you to come here and give me the Labour manifesto.
Oh, I didn't realise this was going to be a Labour manifesto. It's like, you took the conversation here and kept it here.
And you want, also, this is exactly what you wanted, let's be honest.
The reason he's brought him on is because he wants to say these things to Jeremy Corbyn, but he's not going to be granted an audience with Jeremy Corbyn.
No.
So go through his weird brother to trash him.
I knew Mike Graham to be an idiot, basically. So when I was watching the interview, I was surprised how much Piers Corbyn managed to make Mike Graham look like a normal, sensible, intelligent man.
This is where the climate skeptic mode of argumentation really helps Piers Corbyn, because when it's Labour policy, he doesn't have any little niche points to throw in. He's he wants to nationalise the railways. He wants to redistribute wealth from the top people being taxed.
Certainly, nationalisation of British Rail would be.
But why would you nationalise a failing company?
Well, I don't know.
He doesn't have any little nuggets of niche trivia. Whereas when it comes to climate, he's got all these little esoteric points from random articles that no one's read apart from you.
You can work out the beat period. It's about 60 years. And then we have the same beat period in the Tibetan plateau.
Did you know that a study published in 2008 showed that the amount of methane that gathered in the volcanic core in Vostok region was not as much as... And it's okay, why haven't you got any of that level of detail for Labour policies? Something which was very evident in that interview with Mike Graham and would become yet more evident in Piers' own political campaigns was that he really lacks the instincts of a politician. Someone like Piers Corbyn, who, as we've said, has been in the political game, on and off perhaps, but still been in the political game for tens of years by this point, you would expect them to have some sort of political common sense. Running a campaign, there's an image you need to project to the public. You want to get across your principles, your points, but make them relatable to the average person. And there's a balance where you need to do that, giving across some positive aspects of your person and show some charisma, while still appearing like an electable, responsible person who people would want to put in office and trust to look after their shit.
Yeah.
And during that campaign, this is not what you see from Piers Corbyn.
Not at all.
So we give it them as 2 sheets or 1 sheet, double-sided. I'll sign this one and put this one in there.
He's rambling. He's often off topic. He goes into niche rabbit hole warrens in the way he talks. He's rarely emphatic in the way he talks. He kind of stumbles through words.
Now, in order to implement these, proper ways forward to bring justice back to this country.
I think people often say, as a criticism of Jeremy Corbyn, that he's not the most charismatic person.
Can I tell you one secret about me and Tom Watson? We both grew up in the Midlands.
Compared to Piers Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn is like an Idris Elba level of charming Jack Harlow with the ladies, amazingly dressed James Bond figure. He's got so much more sort of political instinct and charisma than Piers Corbyn ever does.
Yeah.
And what doesn't help Piers is that he engages in these wild PR projects, these video clips that he makes that make him look even weirder than he already is. So this first one that I want to talk about is the on a train. Can we say on a train? I'm sure we can say on a train.
We can't say.
Okay, so
mouth shield.
Yes, this is the one. So the first video I want to talk about is a video he made with his associates about mouth shields on trains. And they come up with this jingle that they've got, which none of them seem to have taken the time to learn together. Just to talk you through the scenario, it's a guy sitting on a train, starts talking about mouth shields in this perplexed way.
You know, wearing a mask is like trying to keep a fart in your trousers.
And then slowly he walks down the train carriage and other members of Piers' rowdy crew join him to sing.
Wearing a mask is like trying to keep a fart in your trousers.
I think Piers is the worst one in terms of voice, right?
Keep a fart in your trousers.
Music's not for him, I would say that.
Like, that's how he sounds. You suddenly hear this rumbling, weird, quaky sound.
Fart in your trousers.
None of them seem to know what the melody is. It's kind of like a cross between the sort of chant you would get at a rally or like a protest and a song. Do you know what? I think they put most of their time into coming up with the lyrics. I think that's probably what it was. They didn't have enough time to practice the musicality.
And in that way that, you know, when he's pumping his arms at different times and, you know, he might have been told to dance. Like, oh, Piers, dance. It'll be better if you do a little bit of dancing. And he's like throwing his hands in front of him. And it's like, okay, it's just like you've brought in the moves of a dictator doing a speech. While going, like, this couldn't look any worse for you. So that's the first thing they got him to. I cannot think that this was Piers' idea. I can't think that that's the case because he's just so unsuited to these kinds of appearances.
I mean, he's so unsuited to it, but he's so unsuited to a lot of the things that he does, really. Do you know what I mean? Like, and he does have a lot of weird ideas.
Just such an unnatural mover.
Yeah, he is.
That's what I'd say. He just he doesn't know where to put his arms. He doesn't know where to look. He's sort of like looking at the floor a lot of the times when shouting the words. So there's that video, and then there's the other video, which I'm gonna call "Don't Take the Porky." I think it's spelt in a Jamaican patois way. It's like "Don't take it." It's called "Don't take it." I've said it in a Sheffield way.
Don't take it.
Don't take it. How would you say that, Jamaican? Don't take it. Don't take it. Don't take it. Is that better?
That was closer, yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
I don't think I've seen this, you know.
Yeah. You're in for a right treat.
I'm not a loser. I don't want the booster.
Wait for Piers to come in.
Don't take the vaccine. Don't take the vaccine. Resist! Defy! Resist! Resist! Defy!
So good.
Oh my god, that is one of the best things I've ever seen. That was so good.
So he's got this, like, someone with a yardie flow, Buju Banton style. Don't take the booster! And then Piers Corbyn is just brought in on the side, like, don't take a pokey, don't take a pokey, don't take the pokey, don't take the pokey.
Do you know when it was his bit saying resist, defy?
Yeah.
Like, resist, defy. It seemed to me like they'd just recorded it when he said it one time and put it in the track. Like, it didn't seem like that was planned or rhythmic at all. Like,
the rhythm,
the rhythm was so off.
So you've got a beat that's like, it's like a boom bap beat. It's like, it's like resist, defy, resist. He's like resist, defy, resist, defy, resist, defy. Like, what? Wait, where's the beat in your head, mate? Where's We're off the grid, man. This is turning into like a fucking crazy hood mode track with you on it. And can I just say, I heard this and I just thought, it's a shame because I don't agree with the message, but it's also a shame because the tone is wrong. Like, it's a big crisis of people taking the pokey. It's not something to sing a yardy tune to. So I have made a song which I feel better suits the mournful, despondent situation the pokey people are in. And Piers, if you want to have this for your next campaign, it's gratuit, mon ami. It's gratuit. I'll give it to you fresh, okay?
Okay, I'm so excited to hear this.
Okay, should we both press play? Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Children, don't take the vaccine. Resist the fight. Don't take the vaccine. 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 Don't take it. Don't take the vaccine. Don't take it. Children. Don't take the vaccine.
That was amazing. That was the best we ever heard.
Only the mournful vibe of a 140 garage tune can really encapsulate the sorrow I feel for them pokey recipients, of which I am one. I've had 3. Oh God, it's so sad.
I have also had the booster.
Oh, you should not tech it, Aidan. I'm not a loser.
Also, to be fair, Piers does need help with his multimedia work. Do you know what I mean? And you could be a perfect candidate.
He gives me the budget day one. I go to an AI generation house and I generate a computer version of him that looks very similar to the real one. I spend all the budget on that. I say, Piers, sit down, mate, out of the way.
You're never making another public appearance
You know
ever again.
We know. Okay, you can go in when you get elected, but until that point, it's all AI versions of you, okay? That's the only way we can actually get people on board with your cause, okay?
Yeah, real you is always just going to be too much of a liability.
Yeah, we have hard campaigns and we have lost causes, and I'm afraid you fall into the latter category, my friend.
Another one of Piers's very stupid ideas was to create a leaflet warning people about what he saw as the danger of the medicinal pokies. He managed to do it in the most offensive way possible. So he was actually arrested in 2021 for his involvement in flyers which showed a drawing of the gates of the Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz, where it would say, at Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, meaning work sets you free. He replaced it with the words, vaccines are safe path to freedom, which was a headline taken from the Evening Standard newspaper about the importance of getting vaccines.
Very tasteful, Piers.
So bad. He has gone on since then to support Andrew Bridgen, who is the guy who was kicked out of the Conservative Party for comparing the medicinal pokies to the Holocaust. And Andrew Bridgen is actually the Reclaim Party's MP that we touched on in our last episode. So it's kind of weird how all these people are all in a weird club together.
Oh, he's going to love Andrew Bridgen. Andrew Bridgen is way in on the conspiracy theories. They would have a lot to talk about if they got put in a room together. Put it like that.
Yes. And just another one that we can touch on as well is that Piers Corbyn was actually the victim of a crazy sting operation by 2 YouTubers.
No way.
So these 2 YouTubers basically posed as shareholders in a pharmaceutical company that was one of the big ones that was selling medicinal pokies. And they set up a meeting with him on the basis that they would like to make a large donation to his Stop New Normal campaign. And they offer him cash at this meeting, £10,000. But they kind of say that they want him to focus less on the company that they have invested in and more on the pokey medicine offered by their competitors.
But, you know, if we can obviously help in any way to help your campaign, that's obviously going to help us. We've got shared interests.
It clearly is. I mean, but yeah, okay. No, absolutely.
We actually even brought along a little something today that was just a token of our intention of helping out with your campaign.
Oh, it's
So
Yes.
yeah, and we like to keep it off the book.
Showed him 10 grand in cash.
But this is obviously just a sort of statement of intent. We'd love to keep funding you. So there's £10,000 there.
That's astounding. I mean,
but yeah, it's.
And he basically agrees to this.
Oh, no way.
Offer. He basically agrees. He says at the end of their meeting that he was going to focus on the other ones anyway. So this isn't him changing his policy. This is just what's in the best interest of the public.
So funny.
Very, very funny.
It strikes me that it's true that he's not beholden to corporate interests, but it's not because he has corporate interests lining up at his door wanting to influence him. It's because they're just not interested in a guy who's not going to get in power, right? So It's very, very easy to be outside the tent, pissing into the tent, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as you're put in the situation where you're one of the cogs in the filthy machine, only then can it really be evaluated whether or not you would become part of the system or not. Okay, so we've established the man. We've established the history, a short biography of the... What's that word where it's like a mysterious person? Enigma that is Piers Corbyn. When you edit it, take away the big gap, please. Thank you. Now, I don't like it very much in podcasts or YouTube videos where people are called a crank and the people who made the podcast or video don't actually tell you what is wrong about what they've said and why they disagree. So in this next section, we'd like to earn making fun of Piers Corbyn. But in going through the specific arguments he makes here, what we want to pull out is the fact that all of this is driven by a prevailing view that the establishment are manufacturing conditions in the world and media and events in order to suppress common people and take money away from common people. Piers Corbyn has that belief, and that belief seems to drive everything else he believes, from climate change to the pokey denial to the other assorted conspiracy theories we're going to go into. A large chunk of these are going to come from a speech he gave at a conference, which I found it on YouTube, and it's called El Ser Creativo.
What does that mean?
I think in Spanish it means to be creative or the creative being.
Okay.
Anyway, something happened where an event was put on and Piers Corbyn was the scientist they wanted to listen to on climate change. So we're going to mine this for quotes, and we've got a few that highlight Piers Corbyn's main arguments against the scientific consensus on climate change. So let's start with this one.
Now, we are going to show, or I can show, that world temperatures will continue to decline till 2035, and we're heading for a little ice age.
And he shows this graph, which appears to show a trend of global temperatures going down over a time span of, I don't know, something close to 10 years. Now, first interesting thing about this, there's another guy, a more prolific climate denier, called Christopher Monckton. And that graph which Piers Corbyn is showing is Christopher Monckton's graph. We were talking before about how Piers Corbyn had an interest in this and did his own research on meteorology and stuff. But it seems to me like that didn't preclude him from wholesale taking someone else's point and someone else's graph and someone else's data and just presenting that as his own.
Yeah, I think that is interesting.
And it shows you that climate change deniers, they are against the establishment, they're against scientific consensus narratives, and yet they are a wall of an echo chamber of the same points.
Yeah. So what's the story here? Like, where's the...
Oh, you want to know the story, do you? You don't want me to just show you a fake graph and move on? Well, as you've asked nicely. So if you look at average UK Met data over the time period that he was speaking about, which is 2000 to 2010 or thereabouts, we can see that temperatures, if you look at the grand theme of it from 1890 to 2020, they've clearly gone up. That data that he showed, that's Christopher Monckton's data, picks a really specific time frame between 2000 and 2010, where the end point is at the lowest it was throughout that whole cycle.
Yeah.
And they just draw their line to that end point rather than waiting for the time where it goes back up again and reflects the overall trend.
Essentially, I think what we maybe need to explain is that the mean temperature fluctuates. It goes up and down a lot, but the trend of it going up over time is what we know to be climate change, right? What they've done is pick very particular points where it's happened to have gone down as part of a larger trend where it's moving up over a larger period of time, and said that shows that the Earth is actually cooling down. That's essentially right, isn't it?
Yeah. Global temperatures have only increased more and at a higher rate since Piers Corbyn gave this speech, which was in 2011 when he was giving this speech. He said there was a global cooling between 2000 and 2010. It was already above where it should have been by 2010. It's gone even higher above where it should be in the years since. The next argument that we're going to look into is Piers Corbyn saying there is no significant relationship between CO2 levels and temperature.
Is there any relationship between CO2 and temperatures? The answer is no. Here's the graph.
I love how all of these charts that he's presenting all look like conspiracy theory materials. Like, there's no way, these people just can't get out. It's like the yellow banner with the bold black text at the top that oversimplifies what it shows.
And what I will say is he doesn't do a good job in that speech we've just heard of actually explaining what he's showing.
Yeah.
Christopher Monckton, the other climate change denial person, is quite good at highlighting the specifics. Like, look, this line goes up here and it should be down here.
Yeah.
Right? Piers Corbyn just throws this graph up and goes, and so we can see there's no relation. Then he just moves on. Even with the big text at the top saying, look, there is no connection. So basically the graph, it shows the amount of CO2 and the average temperature from 600 million years ago on Earth. And in this graph, the CO2 levels go up, they go down, and the global surface temperature of the Earth stays about the same. And Piers Corbyn is demonstrating the point that back then, there wasn't a link between CO2 and temperature. The information that's missing here is that the sun was not as powerful. So solar luminosity has gone up loads and loads over time. If you look at this graph, where apparently there's no link between CO2 and temperature, the Earth's average temperature was 22 degrees hotter than today back then. So if you imagine a normal day in England where we'd get a 15-degree day in the middle of spring, that would be a 30-something degree hot day.
Right.
So clearly the CO2 was doing something back then because there was a lot of CO2 levels. And although the temperature wasn't going up with the CO2 levels, despite having a weaker amount of sunlight, the temperatures were insanely high. How do you explain why they were insanely high? Because there was so much CO2.
Oh, is that really what scientists have said?
There's a YouTuber I follow called Pothole54 who's debunked a load of Christopher Monckton stuff, and this was a specific point that he talked about. It's also interesting that in order to show this, there's no link between CO2 and temperature. He shows a graph that shows what it was like on Earth 600 million years ago instead of showing it now, where there's a really precise correlation between CO2 and temperature.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's this thing that people in conspiracy theory land do, where in order to reject broad scientific consensus around climate change, you have to start unraveling lots of other things and making up alternative explanations.
Yeah.
So this is something he's walked into with that specific point. There's no link between CO2 and temperature. In the 1800s, it was demonstrated that heat goes into CO2 particles. It reverberates around the CO2 particles and it releases them again. And therefore, it has a capturing effect. It traps heat.
Okay.
We worked that out in the 1800s. This was observed through people with microscopes. It wasn't a model. It wasn't a theory. They could see it happening.
Yeah.
So if you're saying there's no link between CO2 and temperature, you have to overturn and deny that science as well. You have to say, well, it's not true that CO2 reverberates around and puts heat out because there's no link.
Yeah. You have to get into the cause of the climate change. Does Piers do that?
Yes. Yeah, well, I've basically already refuted it because he says it's the sun getting hotter.
Here's a graph showing historical, over many thousands of years, relationship between particles from the sun and world temperatures. There's a close relationship.
So 600 million years ago, yes, the sun was the main thing that heated up the world because there was no extra elements throwing in the mix to,
It's the same thing that we talked about right at the start. It's this obsession with the link between the sun and weather, right? It's what his whole company was based around. And I think my idea of what's happened is that there are some links between, what's happening with the sun and the temperature on Earth and the weather.
Yeah.
And because he knows a bit about that, he's completely blinded to anything else causing changes in the climate and the weather. And actually, it was probably at one point financially important for him to dismiss any other reason.
Exactly right, yeah.
It's become his whole identity is that the sun is what causes all these changes, and he's been unable to let go of that, even when presented with evidence.
And that graph from 600 million years ago he shows the effect of carbon dioxide as well. So the sun causes the heat to go massively up after an ice age. Once the sun is there and it's hot, why does it get hot, so hot? It's because the sun is there and the CO2 is there. They're both interacting with each other to make the world hotter. It's not one or the other. It's not like either it's the sun or it's carbon dioxide. It's that the sun exists as a phenomenon that heats the world. Carbon dioxide makes it worse.
Yeah. Piers will say, because he's proved that the sun has an effect on weather and the climate, that must disprove that anything else does. Whereas scientists who are respected in this field would probably not deny that there are other causes for fluctuations and changes in the Earth's temperature than CO2 emissions, but they'd realize that us releasing CO2 has massively accelerated the warming of the Earth and is something that we can do something about, right? That's what the difference is between a crank and a scientist, right?
And you've brought us on to the next point, which is, so there's one thing where you don't take into account external factors that are not the sun. There's another thing where you pretend that scientists have said something that they never said. And this is something that he does a lot. So another point in his speech is that climate scientists said there would be more storms due to global warming.
Next thing they said is things like there'll be a great number of more storms. Well, there's been no increase in storms.
I'm going to read you an excerpt from a paper from the IPCC, which is looked at as the devil by Piers Corbyn. They're the main organisation that pushes global warming theory, climate change,
What does the IPCC stand for? Do you know?
It's a very good question. Can you look it up and tell the audience, please?
Yep. It is the intergovernment. Oh my God, it's such a big word. It is.
Can you stop wasting time and just say the word, please?
It is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Yeah. So this is the main institution that forms a consensus around climate change and makes that materialize through policy in different national governments. So he hates it. It's the devil. This is a paper that they published in 1996. It said, it is not possible to say whether the frequency, area of occurrence, time of occurrence, mean intensity or maximum intensity of tropical cyclones will change. So in 1996, they said it wasn't clear whether storms would increase or decrease. Here's a paper from another climate scientist from 1998. There is no evidence to suggest any major changes in the area or global location of tropical cyclones. The very modest available evidence point to an expectation of little or no change in global frequency. So that's another climate scientist in 2001 saying evidence points to there being no increase or storms staying the same. And I've got another paper here from 2010 where a panel did a more definitive review of the existing data and literature and said that based on existing modelling studies and limited existing observations, we judge that it is likely that global tropical cyclone frequency will either decrease or remain unchanged owing to greenhouse warming. So not only have they not said what he says they're saying, they've been consistent about this since 1996.
Yeah, I bet he does not provide a source for them saying that, right?
That's what I mean.
And also, you can say it and people will believe it because they're also not going to read the papers.
They've consistently said either they don't have evidence to say there's going to be more storms, and then at the end, by 2000, like by the time that he's giving this speech in 2010, they say they think storm frequency is likely to go down. and he's just going out there with this like armful of like facts, quote unquote facts about the climate scientists and the lies they're telling. And I think that's probably revealing of the little echo chamber he's in.
Yeah, definitely.
On a side point, if you look at the models that they published in, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s by the IPCC and like various research papers that were published, they've been remarkably accurate to the actual degree of warming that we've seen.
Right.
They did an estimate based on if we make no changes to policy, if we make medium amount of changes, or if we make no changes. And the medium amount of changes that they predicted based on, how much it would increase over that time has been so close to the level of global warming we've actually seen in the world. So they've obviously nailed something there that Piers Corbyn hasn't, because he says the temperature is decreasing.
Yes.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And now I'm going to wrap up there on his actual technical arguments. And I want to go into the conspiracy theories, because this is kind of the fun bit. You've got this motivated reasoning at play. You've got this specific way of thinking about institutions, scientists, world governments. And now you have to then apply that to the news and things that are running past you day to day in newspapers. Piers Corbyn comes out with some absolute zany theories about what's going on. For any conspiracy theory, whether it's flat Earth, whether it's QAnon, you have to have an explanation as to why, if what you're saying is correct, scientists don't agree with you and governments don't agree with you.
Yeah.
Because the theory on its own, saying that they've got the facts wrong, isn't enough to explain why everyone around the world would unite and push a falsehood.
Yeah.
And so Piers Corbyn, like all the adherents of those ideologies, has reasons why the government is lying to the people about climate change. And we'll start with this one.
You might say, well, why? If this is all, if it's such nonsense, why is it still holding sway? Well, the answer is the same as the problem faced by Galileo or Harrison when he was measuring longitude and so on, is there are interest groups and you have to just follow the money. And one of the biggest interest groups, despite public claims, the biggest interest groups backing this, what I would call CO2 delusionism, is the oil companies. They love price rises.
So this is really weird, because as public opinion becomes more and more concerned with climate change caused by the burning of fossil fuels, there will be more and more regulation of people that sell fossil fuels, and probably higher taxes, like green taxes, brought in to dissuade people from choosing a fossil fuel power source. So it doesn't really make sense for them to be the ones inventing this idea that they are causing climate change.
If you look at the activity of oil companies over the last 40, 50 years, they've very actively sponsored climate denial.
Yes.
They've published advertorials in newspapers. They talked about global warming hysteria. And it's like, so it has to become even more complex than Piers is suggesting. Not only did they invent climate change theories, they also then paid money to publish adverts against the narrative that they planted to make it even more complex and make it look like they were against it.
To cover their tracks.
Yeah, they give their donations to politicians who actively fight against climate change.
Yeah.
17 out of 20 of the top recipients of donations from oil and gas companies are Republicans. That party's whole modus operandi for the last 40 years has been denying climate change.
Telling people that climate change is nothing to worry about means that they're more likely to go on flights, buy an expensive car.
Stop feeling guilty about driving a car. Just drive it, okay?
All that sort of shit, which increases demand for their product. So why would they? It just doesn't make sense at all.
Doesn't make sense at all. And I was thinking maybe he's going for an angle of like oil prices have risen a lot since the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s. But there's reasons for every single peak and trough. Like the 1860s, the American Civil War, really high oil prices because it was hard to logistically transport things around the country at that time. 1970s, there was loads of trouble in the Middle East, the Yom Kippur War, the Iranian Revolution, resulting in disruptions to supply chains. 2000s, demand from China and India massively goes up, so there's less oil to go around, therefore prices increase.
Also, I imagine that because oil is a finite resource, that it's going to become more and more scarce, and therefore the price will go up anyway.
That's it. And adjusting for inflation, it was no higher recently than it was in the 1970s in terms of people's economic means of buying the oil. So, and I guess that conspiracy theory goes hand in hand with this one, which allows us to elaborate more on Piers' thinking. So in 2011, that was his argument, that climate change was pushed by fossil fuels company so they can charge more for oil and gas and whatever.
Yeah.
By 2019, in his interview with Sargon of Akkad, Piers Corbyn is saying that climate change is a way for governments to redistribute handouts to mega corporations so they can compete with China.
It's to give huge amounts of money to large organisations, mega corporations, to build wind farms or develop more unnecessary batteries. It's a way of handing out money to failing businesses in the West who are suffering under China and India's competitiveness.
Really, that's a really fascinating way of looking at it.
What?
Now, for me, those two things, they're doing it to increase price of oil, and they're doing it to push wind farms. They contradict each other, because oil companies had domination of the market in the 1970s, 80s, 90s. They had all the money. Why would you push for policies that take your money and put them in other businesses that are pushing wind farms? Because the people building wind farms aren't the same ones.
Sometimes they are the same ones, but you're right that it introduces competitors. If you've got a monopoly on oil production, but you don't have a monopoly on wind farms, it wouldn't be helpful to you.
I've got a demonstrative example here. So in 2023, the UK government announced it would be investing in some renewable energy suppliers and technical people as part of our push to be technologically superior now that we've left Europe and there's no other strings to our bow, per se, as the British. Remember, Piers Corbyn is saying that these are mega corporations. Here are some of the companies that receive money from the government. Synchro Store in Scotland were given 9.4 million to build a pumped thermal energy storage grid-connected demonstration plant. I've looked at their filings on Companies House. Their net assets, which is all the money and assets they own, minus anything they owe to other companies, was £359,575.
Okay, I have something that really does put this in perspective. Piers Corbyn's weather prediction company.
Yeah.
Guess what, at its peak, what the valuation of that company was?
What?
$6 million.
So he was part of more of a mega corporation than the people getting money.
Yes.
That's fucking insane.
And he was literally being paid by oil companies.
It's like the level of hypocrisy is astounding.
Yeah, it is.
So there was also Infinity Energy Scotland, who were given 11 million to develop a vanadium flow battery. That company was made out of a merger between two other companies. One was a UK company with net assets of about 2 million. The other one was a bigger American company with net assets of around 35 million. So altogether, that's a 39 million net assets company. Still nowhere near a mega corporation. There was Cheesecake Energy Nottingham, who have net assets of 4 million. And to put it all in perspective, British Petroleum, which is the leading fuel sort of company in the UK, this is the oil company who, according to Piers Corbyn, would have sponsored climate change activism theories in order to redistribute money, right? This company has net assets of 278,660 million. If it's the fuel company's idea, and maybe like we could say, according to Piers' conspiracy theory, these could be shell companies, right? Where there's like secret, they're funneling the money around. They had a domination of the market in the 80s, 90s, and they sponsor this thing so that they have to go to the effort of making shell companies to get a measly like £9 million from the government, which is nowhere near the money that they make from fuel. Like, what?
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre.
Fucking stupid, mate. And then China. So it's to compete with China. China spend more on renewable energies than America. So what's going on there? I mean, so they're in on it too, right? Or they're making loads of money off fuel, but they also want to get in on the climate change scam and randomly give money to renewable energy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Piers' opinions don't really hold up to more than 30 seconds of thinking about them.
It seems to me like it could be like a weird, like Western exceptionalism, where the West are in control of everything, and everything that happens is dictated by the West.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that China are investing in renewable energies it's not part of the thinking, doesn't enter into his radar.
Yeah, he hasn't thought about it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is, for me, the interesting question. Why do you think Piers says this stuff?
I think he believes it. From what we've talked about, it would be a belief that is really common on the far left circles who think in the same way, that everything the establishment does, good, bad, or indifferent, is made to take money away from everyday working people. So therefore, I don't think he would have been mad at climate scientists in the 90s or in the 80s when this was a burgeoning scientific research topic where papers were being published, but it was something just having momentum in the science world. I think the second that it entered into government thinking about budgets and spending and media companies were talking about it, for him, the fact that they are endorsing it makes it ipso facto against the interests of the everyday person.
It's an automatic assumption. Yeah, I agree, I think.
I don't see him as like someone who doesn't believe what he's saying. I think he does. But there's motivated reasoning that goes into every piece of evidence he looks at. And then he just sort of like unexplains things in the world in order to fit them to the theory.
Yeah. I always think of climate denial as being usually financially motivated. Normally, people are getting paid really well because there's a lot of money in protecting fossil fuel business, right? But I just can't imagine anyone parting with money to have Piers Corbyn as a spokesperson for your views, because he's just terrible at it.
As I say, very ineffective. Like, you've got to, if you are espousing like climate conspiracy theories, the way to beat the scientists is to be way more approachable, way more clear in the evidence you're laying out, and really like point to the spikes in the graphs and the lines and exactly why they don't say what the scientists are telling you they say.
Yeah.
But Piers Corbyn is just like, look, it shows it. Look. And then he moves on to the next slide. He's like, and look, this shows the carbon dioxide thing. And he moves on to the next slide. He's like, look. And it's like, what? What are you showing me?
So obviously he has the beliefs. That's enough. But what he doesn't have that a lot of other people like this have is the kind of technical ability. Like, he's not a YouTuber. Do you know what I mean? He's not like someone who can make engaging content. He comes from the old guard of the left where you organized protests and you went out and marched and held signs and blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of like how he approaches his politics today. Do you know what I mean? And it doesn't work very well, I would say. Like, I don't know who his audience is because it's not, it's just not that entertaining to watch.
If you've got a really anti-establishment narrative, the main way to make money off that is to be entertaining.
Yeah.
And to spin it on YouTube and be an alternative media figure. He doesn't have those skills.
No, he doesn't.
Instead, what he does have is indignance, being indignant at people not listening to him. And the fact that he gets ignored and whatnot adds to fuels the fire of his rage.
Yes.
At the fact that they're ignoring him. I think, a very odd character. So, I think that's about it for today. Are we going to wrap up?
Yeah, man, let's wrap it up. We've already given the people way more than they deserve.
way more than they asked for. So I mean, I think we've done the Uxbridge Ruislip duology now.
Yeah. Great that we could get 2 episodes out of one election. This really bodes well for our future ability to make content.
Like, the roster of candidates for the Uxbridge Ruislip campaign was like the Super Smash Bros lineup. It's all your favourite characters in one place.
I reckon if we looked into more of the weirdo independents, we could probably squeeze a few more episodes out of it.
Yeah. When we have a dry month, we'll go back into the Uxbridge archive and just dig someone out. But it's been really fun. Thank you everyone for listening. We appreciate you as always. Bye.
Jumping off the jumping off the